It's mainly for Germaine, I guess. Having a conversation is better than not having one at all. However, you say that, and I quote, most rapes don't involve any injury at all. Are you saying that being violated physically doesn't come with any mental anguish? Anguish that can scar a woman, a man, a girl, or a boy for life?
Germaine.
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm trying to get people to understand is that on the one end of the spectrum you have criminal rape. The rapes that result in convictions in the criminal courts are usually by strangers. They are usually violent and surprising. But in fact, the whole spectrum goes a great deal further, and we've got to take that on board. Now, one reason why I wrote my little essay, I've been writing on rape all my life, but one reason why I wrote it is that there's a thing happening called the Istanbul Convention. And the point of the Istanbul Convention is to try and get some sense of the law across the globe, really. It's a global question. How can we make the law of sexual assault coherent when, in fact, they're strikingly different? If we're in Belgium, for example, we can be parties to the trial in a criminal rape case. If we're in Southern Ireland, we're going to be in a closed court with anonymity for both parties, the accused and the accuser, and so on. And somehow this has got to be sorted out because we're not getting anywhere. We're getting ridiculous results. We're getting 4 young men in Belfast who abused a girl horribly, being acquitted of all charges, and Irish sports writers saying they hadn't got a stain on their conscience.
Germaine, I'm just going to go back to our questioner because she's obviously got that quote from somewhere. And I must say that I've seen a lot in the press about you suggesting that rape does not involve injury. So just go back to the questioner. Are you saying from what you've read that that's your interpretation?
Yeah, that was...
Except, look, what the police will tell you is that most rape complaints don't involve injury. Most rapists are known to the people who make the complaint, but the people who make the complaint get nowhere. I'm not saying that it's not damaging. I was raped at 19, and actually, because I'm an idiot, I was actually sorrier for the man who raped me than I was for myself, because I thought, what's happened to his sexuality? Why has he turned into this mad dog? They'll shoot him, they'll kill him, they'll wipe him out. I don't know what happened to him.
Are you saying it didn't traumatise you, though? That's, I guess, because that goes to the heart of what the question is asking.
Well, trauma is something that is dictated, really, by the sufferer. You know, I can't bear huntsman spiders. It's not their fault. It's my fault. I'm decided to be frightened of them. Now, it's interesting to me that women are encouraged all the time to be terribly, terribly frightened, and nearly always of the wrong thing.
OK, Germaine, I'm going to bring in the other women. Sasonke, what do you think?
So, having read the Germaine's essay, which I really enjoyed and surprised myself in enjoying it because I had read the media around it and had seen some of her sort of more off-the-cuff comments, so I fully expected not to enjoy it, and I did. And part of why I enjoyed it was because I think it offers us a really complicated way to think about rape, and it requires time and energy into thinking about it, which is kind of anathema to the media. And one of the things that I think is important in there, I'm trying to find Diana again. Yeah,
she's up there.
One of the things I think is important in that idea is not that rape doesn't involve injury, because it clearly involves loads of injury, mental and sometimes physical, but that what Germaine, I think, asks us to grapple with is what do we do when the people who rape us are people who we know and love? This is a very complicated question, one that requires us to think about it, because the vast majority of rape happens by people who know and love us against us. What do we do there? In that situation, I think it's a question that doesn't yet have an answer, but requires us to think not in sound bites, not in quick little snappy tweets, but actually to have real, measured, thoughtful, and very difficult conversations with one another.
Eleanor.
Well, first of all, I don't know how I feel about the huntsman spider analogy for rape and the trauma involved there. But look, I'm not a rape survivor or victim, so on the one hand, I feel like I'm not even qualified to speak about this. But then again, I do agree with Sasonke. This is just an immeasurably complex issue. You know, the whole field of consent. Like, I've also read Germaine's book. You know, consent is almost an indefinable thing, and Germaine made some very salient points about, you know, the fact that on college campuses you've got a lot of young people who are at that stage in their life where they are exploring their own sexuality, their own identity, what they're okay with and aren't, and so, you know, how they don't even know from moment to moment necessarily what they are okay with, and therefore whether they do give consent. So this is just incredibly complex. One of the things that I took away from reading Germaine's book is that I think as women of, you know, different generations, and I owe a lot to Germaine. I think my generation owes a lot to Germaine. But I think we have slightly different priorities, maybe, with regards to rape and women who are raped. So last year, Germaine made comments about child brides in India and the fact that, you know, they don't have to have sexual intercourse with their husbands necessarily. You know, the mother-in-law will determine when they're ready for that. But now in her book, you know, she's discussing the fact that she's very concerned with women who are in long-term stable marriages, you know, who are having unwanted sex, you know, and so I'm kind of thinking, hold on, what are our priorities here? Like, I'm more concerned about, I would consider that to be rape of child brides. Any child bride has not given consent. You are a child. You cannot give consent. And you have, you know, you're trapped in a marriage with someone 2 or 3 times older than you. You know, that is the rape we should be concerned with. Not so much baby boomer wives who, you know, by Germaine's own admission, are happy in the lives that they've chosen and do not seek to end those marriages.
Well, let's just bring Germaine back in on that. I mean, one of the points you're making in the book is that bad marriages and bad sex quite often equals rape. That seems to be, and you're basically saying there's almost an epidemic of rape within marriages.
I can see why this annoys you, but
I'm not saying it annoys me. I'm
but
just
here am I
pointing out
talking
that's one of your points.
I'm still trying to talk about the Istanbul Convention, because if you don't like what it says, you better start paying attention, because it could become part of the legal structure in your societies, wherever you are. Now, what has been said in the text that is written for the Istanbul Convention, which was partly written by the British, who have refused to ratify it, which is typical. We're used to them, and when it comes to this kind of thing. But what it says is non-consensual sex is rape. Now, if you're asleep, you can't give consent. If you're drunk, you can't give consent. If you're being terrorised, you can't give consent. If your husband won't speak to you for a week unless you spread your legs, you can't give consent. You can only give in. Now, I don't know what the figures are there. I only know that nobody goes there. If you read the things that women say online about sex within their marriages, you realise these women are being systematically raped, and they have never protested. Now, we've either got to start men thinking that women are not things, that women are not things they can play with when they feel like it, that sex is as hard as conversation, and most of us have no conversation at all on this issue. Now, this is serious, and that's why I wrote this little essay.
OK, Germaine, let's hear from the men, and I'll start with David, legally trained, as you are, and a man.
Violence is not, and I don't think for a very, 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 very long time, a key element of rape. I mean, rape is, in our law, sexual intercourse without consent or digital penetration or various other forms of penetration. Now, your essay is only about digital penetration. So
no, it isn't. It's only about penile penetration.
I'm sorry.
The vagina is not a hole like any other, is the general idea.
Yeah, I got that.
Direct quote.
I got that quite a long time ago. But so what you're talking about, the Istanbul Convention, and let me tell you, Australia is not going to be influenced by the Istanbul Convention. We're not influenced by refugee conventions. We're not influenced by human rights conventions. We're not going to be interested much in the Istanbul Convention.
Let's go back to consent, though, David.
Yes, and at the heart, as you say beautifully in the essay, at the heart of rape is the question of consent. And the question of determining whether the raper knew or ought to have known that he did not have consent. This has always been astonishingly difficult to prove in law. And I looked at some statistics today, and Australia, like most other countries, civilised countries, less than 10% of crimes that are complained of to the authorities end up with a conviction. And everywhere there are these appalling difficulties. And I read the essay as an eloquent work of despair, because everywhere you explore in the essay, you come up against a brick wall, or a failed initiative, or an old problem. And I came to the end of the essay, not agreeing with you on many, many things, but thinking that, you know, if you want to know what the challenges are in this area, this is not a bad place to start to read them.
Andrew, do you want to jump into these murky waters?
Not really. What I'd like to ask Germaine, though, where's the evidence, where's the data for rape within marriage or long-term partnerships? What's the evidence that that is as common as you're saying it is?
None. We've never asked. There's
So
no
you're
evidence at all.
asserting something, but you don't have the evidence.
It's not true in my marriage. I just read it and just went, Germaine, I think you're speaking for an older generation. Like,
It's because we're too old to fuck. Is that
look, can I just say, Tony, I think my generation has benefited hugely from, you know, your earlier works, and I just think it's wrong to characterise our marriages, the marriages of, you know, people of my generation, as being ones where the women are submissive and powerless, and I take offence to
But
that.
I haven't actually done that. What I've said is that we don't know if consent is the issue. And I gave some cases, which are actual cases I know about. That's my evidence. So I took the case of one...
But you're an academic. You know that anecdote is not data.
Yeah, but we don't
and I'm not
have any
denying,
data.
I'm not saying
The reason we don't have-
you're wrong. I just don't know. I tend to be, I know it's unfashionable these days, but I tend to be fact-driven and data-driven before I come to conclusions about things. I know I'll never catch on, but I plough a lonely furrow nevertheless. And I'm just...
An awful lot of opinion in The Spectator, I'll just note that.
And if you want to speak about the opinion of The Spectator, you should ask the editor of The Spectator.
Yeah, true.
Because that's his job, not mine. And that's my opinion.
Nicely said.
But I just think, you know, I think it's a really interesting concept, and I'm sure that in a number of relationships, of married couples or long-term partnerships, that there is what would amount to rape in a number of cases. That seems to me just to be common sense. But what I'm trying to get to is, what is the scale of it? How omnipresent is it? How big is the problem is really
Just
what I was asking.
Just hang on for 1 second, Jermaine. I just want to hear from Sonke.
So the metric that I'm familiar with doesn't look at marriage, but it looks at the fact that we know that the majority of sexual violence in relationship, the majority of sexual violence in the Australian Human Rights Commission has a stat that says in the last 12 months, 74% of women who report that they have been victims of sexual violence, it was somebody that they knew.
Yes.
Okay? So that begins to give us a proxy.
That doesn't surprise me.
Right? And it gives us a proxy that it's not their, like, best friend. Like, if it's someone that they knew, it's likely to be their male partner, right? So we have some metrics that begin to point us in the direction that Germaine is writing about. And I will say that that I'm not convinced that there's a generational issue here. So obviously, I think things are getting better, but but it's very clear that the terrain that Germaine is talking about is really complicated. And what she's talking about is the fact that the word rape doesn't even enter the conversation, right? So that what people are doing won't even be named as rape because there's an expectation of a certain kind of sex. And I think that's a really important conversation.